on the modern history of Cambodia. When the Americans finally pulled out of Vietnam in the spring of 1975, the pro-Western government of Cambodia had no chance of surviving. On the morning of April 17th, the Communist Army of Pol Pot moved into the Cambodian capital, Phnom Penh. Pol Pot grew up near the Great National Museum and knew how glorious the early history of Cambodia had been. He was fond of saying that if the Khmer people could build Angkor, they could do anything. He had read about the great rice-growing success in ancient times and wanted to revive this glorious period of Cambodia's history. The result was one of the worst tragedies in this century of horrors. Within hours of Pol Pot's coup, the people of Phnom Penh and other cities were being told to leave their homes and march out into the country. Without exception, young or old, toddlers or disabled, sick or pregnant, were on their feet. For the next 4 years, the horrors of the killing fields continued, with almost everyone in the country forced to grow rice. Any sign of dissent meant instant death, and maybe as many as 2 million people, a quarter of the total population, perished. It was a tragedy based in part on the mistaken idea that the ancient reservoirs were giant rice-growing machines.
As the war was stoked and intensified in South Vietnam, sanctuaries across the border and supply routes through Cambodia became vital to the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese. Their use of supply trails and Cambodia's port was discreet, and the Viet Cong limited their presence to the sparsely populated eastern provinces. But Cambodia's neutrality was nonetheless compromised, and Sihanouk could do nothing to prevent it. He could not afford to make outright enemies of the communists, whom he was convinced must ultimately dominate Vietnam. And at all costs, he had to prevent American and South Vietnamese forces from spilling the war across Cambodia. Fearing invasion, Sihanouk initially denied the Viet Cong were using Cambodia. He vehemently protested American border violations. But after 1968, he became equally outspoken in protesting the Viet Cong. It is a remarkable feat that Cambodia was maintained as an island of peace through 2 decades of turmoil in the surrounding region. And ironic that Sihanouk should be undone by a reaction of opponents from within Cambodia. Quiet internal opposition. Sihanouk proclaimed a new government of national salvation in August 1969. Prime Minister was Lon Nol, a grand old man of the Cambodian army. And included was Prince Sisowath Sirimatak, from a branch of the royal family which had been passed over by the French in favor of Norodom Sihanouk. Sihanouk found himself more and more at odds with Lon Nol's cabinet and its determination to break down his stifling control on the economy. Despite the risk, in January 1970, Sihanouk left for France seeking rest and medical treatment. He planned to visit Moscow and Peking, and was probably confident of returning triumphant with promises of enlarged economic aid and renewed assurances on the Viet Cong presence.
I plan to talk to Moscow and Peking and to say to them that they should advise their allies, the Viet Cong, the Viet Minh, to avoid, other to refrain themselves from interfering in the affairs of the Cambodian, because Cambodia will not be willing to be communized, and they will meet with strong resistance of the Cambodian people if they want to commonize us.
But on March the 11th, Phnom Penh erupted. Organized demonstrations sacked the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong embassies. If originally contrived, it very quickly degenerated into a genuine political crisis, and reactionaries seized the opportunity afforded by Sihanouk's absence. What started as protest against an external threat was fanned into popular hatred of the domestic Vietnamese community.
Do you feel that Americans, say the CIA, has helped to stir up this trouble in Cambodia, or are your people genuinely against the Viet Cong interference there?
Everything is possible, but I do not want to accuse the United States. I have not any proof about it, but I can say that some officers in our army and many deputies and many members of the government in Phnom Penh, they want to be your allies in order to have your dollars. They don't think about the destiny and the fate of our homeland. They don't mind about it. They are more patriots for dollars than for Cambodia.
Sihanouk was expected to return immediately, but instead he continued to Moscow and Peking. On March the 18th, 1970, the National Assembly voted to dismiss Monodom Sihanouk as Chief of State. The reins of power were seized by Lon Nol and Sirimasak. A disastrous ultimatum was issued demanding the removal, within 48 hours, of all Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces from Cambodian soil. Whether by miscalculation or design, the situation was irretrievable. The time of war had come. Months of fighting, the toll was appalling. Dark shadows in dance macabre blighted reason. Khmer was swept by delusions of the glory that was its people 1,000 years before, and consumed by a hatred for all Vietnamese. For their part, communist guerrillas carved the countryside with ruthless efficiency. transformed from popular monarchy to a general's republic. Despite the campaigns to blacken his name, Sihanouk continues to be revered as Samdech-U, the Father King, by the majority of his people. But Sihanouk has remained in Peking, where he heads the government in exile.
Sihanouk's biggest mistake was in simply leaving the country. As long as he was here, he was in pretty good control of things. And I don't think that even the rightest of the right-wing people who are now in power really, at that point, even on March 18th, 1970, conceived of the day that they would be without Sihanouk.
The speaker is Alan Dawson, former bureau chief for United Press International in Phnom Penh.
The story is that a reporter from the New York Times was interviewing Sirk Matok. Sirk Matok handed the reporter a copy of a note which he said he had just sent to the embassies of the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, demanding withdrawal of their forces by March the 15th, a Sunday, and this was a Thursday. So he'd given him something less than 48 hours to clear 50,000 troops out of the country. And the reporter looked at the note and he said, well, this obviously means war. And Sirk Matok said to him, do you really think so? Whether the story is true or not, it's indicative certainly of a naivete.
The new regime had immediately sued for American aid. The United States was ambivalent in the throes of winding down its war in Indochina. But arms and dollars were sent to prop the new dependency. For with the overthrow of Sihanouk, President Nixon was handed the long-awaited opportunity to strike at communist sanctuaries and supply routes. Or at worst, to window dress Vietnam by beating the flames and sweeping the ashes next door.
Tonight, American and South Vietnamese units will attack the headquarters for the entire communist military operation in South Vietnam. This key control center has been occupied by the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong for 5 years in blatant violation of Cambodia's neutrality. This is not an invasion of Cambodia. Our purpose is not to occupy the areas. Once enemy forces are driven out of these sanctuaries, and once their military supplies are destroyed, we will withdraw.
Weapons and supply caches were captured, but the enemy simply dissolved. In the sparsely populated wilds of Cambodia, Vietnamese guerrillas have no roots and have the mobility and cunning to skirt confrontation. The heaviest casualties then, and the devastated bridges, roads, villages, schools, markets and hospitals inevitably have been Khmer, not Vietnamese. The notable impact was Vietnamization, but the Vietnamization of Cambodia. For the effect of the operation was to drive the Vietnamese communists deeper into Cambodia, so that now they have absolute control of all northern and northeastern provinces and range freely throughout the rest of the country. Although American ground forces were withdrawn, the South Vietnamese Arvin remained, as often looting and raping in villages as seriously engaging the enemy.
In the words of the street people now, Cambodia is a rip-off. It's being ripped off by three of its neighbors, North and South Vietnam, and on the other side Thailand, and by the United States, direct participants in the war.
Between them, then, the Vietnamese have left Lon Nol as little more than the mere Phnom Penh, and even the capital can be strangled at will by guerrillas. Selectively, and with callous efficiency, guerrillas have raised petrol storage farms, knocked out the oil refineries, and crippled other key facilities. In attacks on the Air Force, they all but grounded the Air Force. At times of their own choosing, they harassed shipping on the Mekong River and methodically cut each vital highway linking Phnom Penh to the provinces and the outside world. Unable to counter the guerrillas, frustration has turned inward. Once prided school buildings are scavenged by troops. The social and economic fabric is torn apart. Society has fragmented and factions set at one another's throats. In the streets of the capital, bloody duels have been fought between South Vietnamese allies and Khmer battalions, military police and paratroopers. In markets and shops, racial feeling has been turned against the Chinese. Bands of soldiers demand free food, cigarettes, and luxuries, battling their extortion with rifle butts and grenades. In the courts, under the same martial law which convicted Sihanouk and members of his family of high treason, 2 Chinese businessmen were sentenced to death as war profiteers for selling motor cars. In the bureaucracy, in the military and in government, corruption is rampant and no longer controlled even for political solidarity. And at the top, the facade of democracy became so crazed by political rivalry that parliamentary government was abandoned after the first anniversary of the new republic. Refugees continue to pour into Phnom Penh. The population of the capital has more than doubled, possibly even trebled, since the outbreak of war, and with the influx, social and economic problems have been compounded. However desperate the situation, Khmer were flushed with patriotism, and the call to arms was met with a will to fight and to drive every last Vietnamese from their country. At the outbreak of war, the army numbered less than 35,000 and was totally unprepared for combat. Within 12 months, the ranks had swollen to more than 150,000. The mobilization swept into combat, peasants, students, boys, factory workers, clerks, and even girls, with little or no training, ill-equipped, but fired with enthusiasm. Tragically, the tactics of the military regime have been to mount massive conventional operations. No subtle hide-and-seek counterinsurgency. Before bulldozing forward, airstrikes, bombing and strafing are called, and a barrage of artillery, mortars and small arms from the ground. Too often, and too late, it's realized that the guerrillas have fled. The casualties and the captives are frightened civilians.
We call fighting a political war, and the Cambodians, as the Vietnamese and Americans and French before them, are fighting a military war. Take that hill and we'll have gained more territory. The communists are not fighting for territory. They're fighting for the right to maintain infiltration trails, and they're fighting for control of the people. And this is where the civil war aspect comes in. More villages that are destroyed by Cambodian artillery and American and Vietnamese and Thai airstrikes, the more Khmer Rouge or Red Cambodians are made, and the civil war builds up.